Well then, yeah, welcome everyone. We're 47 guests right now, our 5 panelists, and their greetings from Gaza, Brazil, Potsdam, very exciting, more Brazil, and Princeton, USA. Welcome everyone, and I think we're ready to meet our audience a little bit more. But I think before we do that, I think all of us should introduce themselves. So maybe this is the right time, Stephanie, to take down the main screen. Please note the hashtags and our Twitter handles, and I would suggest that everybody just gives our participants a quick idea about who they are and why they're here, because 2 of them made this event happen, basically. I think, Russell, you were the first one to ask me to join this thing tonight. Why won't you start introducing yourself?
Thank you, Christina. My name is Russell Alt-Haaker, and I work for the Universitaet Verlags- und Medienhaus here in Berlin, where I'm in charge of a platform called OpenD. And it's an open access publication platform specifically for dissertations. And our aim is to try to take dissertations and the research of young academics, whether or not they decide to stay in academia, and make it more visible and make it more comprehensible to society at large. So finding new ways of creating or of sharing information that is more comprehensible to people outside of the academic community.
Thank you, Russell. Then Stephanie, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Stephanie from ScienceOpen. ScienceOpen is a startup from Berlin from 2013. So we've been involved in the open access community in Berlin for quite some time. We are a discovery platform that tries to really put research in context with an interactive interface so that users can share, review, and curate content on the platform. And we provide services to publishers, mostly open access publishers within that discovery environment, to everything from promotion of their content all the way up to full publishing platforms.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out which round is the more interesting, but I think we're going to go through Erzsébet and then to Agata.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Erzsébet Tóth-Czifr, and probably I'm the odd one out one in this panel who is not representing publishing initiative. I'm the Open Science Officer of DARIAH. DARIAH is a European research infrastructure consortium dedicated to supporting arts and humanities research. So imagine a transnational Europe-wide consortium of institutions doing arts and humanities research and building infrastructure to them. And I'm lucky enough, fortunate enough to work on open science policies and practices at DARIAH as they make sense in arts and humanities workflows. So you are going to hear perspectives from the researcher side from me, and also a perspective from from around the European policy landscape. And yes, my disciplinary bias is also arts and humanities, but probably this is not that important for today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Great, thanks you, Erzsébet. And then Agata.
Hello, everyone. I am Agata Morka. I work as the European coordinator for open access books, currently affiliated with Open Book Publishers. And pretty much I am here because several weeks ago, Stephanie invited me and Erzsébet for a glass of wine, and she told us that there was this Berlin Science Week happening, and that it would be good to talk about discoverability of open access books. In my everyday work life, I work simultaneously on 2 big European projects. One of them is the Openness project, the other one is the Copying project, and both of these projects look at innovation in open access books and look at different business models or revenue models, however we would like to call them, something which would be different from the BPC-based business models for open access books. So this is in a nutshell what I do.
Thank you, Agata. And myself, I'm Christina Reisenberg. I work at Freie Universitaet Berlin, and I've been doing so for about 5 years. I have a background in academic publishing. I used to be an editor for both journals and books before. And then I basically did a lot of open access stuff. So everybody who's doing open access in Berlin might have met me at the Open Access Bureau Berlin. But currently I'm moving on, well, not moving on, my focus is on change management in the university library. So I'm looking at more how can we change the big picture, which I think is very relevant for what we're going to talk about today. And the focus of today's panel discussion will be, as all of you mentioned already, will be about discoverability and visibility of open access publications. And I'm excited to get talking. But before we do so, we would very much like to learn just a little bit more about our audience. We have 47 people with us right now, and since we can't see you, Stephanie has prepared a little number of questions that I would ask you to run and introduce now. Yeah, so you're seeing now, Stephanie, we can't hear you, still muted. So everybody who's playing
There we go.
Zoom bingo, that's your first cross. Yeah, so you have a couple of questions in front of you. Stephanie, do you wanna talk us through them? And everybody can just start clicking.
Sure. I mean, we just wanted to understand a little bit what was essentially your interest. Are you a researcher, an academic, a student, or actually coming from the publishing industry? And then we were interested to know very briefly open access. Have you already published open access or not? And then broadly, what is your field? Science, medicine, technology, or humanities, social sciences? In part because there's really big differences in the traditions and also the developments in open access in each of these fields. I think there's a lot that we can also learn from each other, and we are seeing things grow together really quickly, but I'm sure Erzsébet can attest to the fact that the humanities and STM have, you know, some really different issues that that they're dealing with. So it's good for us to know, like, roughly what you guys are interested in.
Okay, I have like one question in the chat that they cannot submit the poll. If you scroll down, there should be a submit button at the very bottom, right? Is this because we as the host and panelists can't see it at the moment?
Yes, you don't have to. You don't have to submit when I see that most of the people have finished voting, then I will end the polling. So we're at 78% right now. So maybe give you guys another 45 seconds for the last few, or maybe some of you just didn't want to vote here, but exactly. So just to then, yeah, I think we'll go ahead and end this here. Then everyone will see the results. Oh,
wow.
You can see 72% of you are researchers or academics, a few publishers among us, some students who are essentially researchers and academics at the beginning of your career. But very many of you have published an article or review, and almost 60% have published work under Creative Commons open access license.
Nice.
It looks like most people are actually coming from STM, but 14% humanities and 19% social science. So we certainly have a a good mix with us today.
Yeah, great. So thank you all for letting us know who you are. So mainly researchers, but also journalists, interested public, and people from other walks of life. Awesome. So we're closing now the poll if you're looking for it. That was it, and I think we're gonna jump right in. You will all have read the description of this event, what we're trying to talk about. And of course, all of us are working in the open access or open science field to some extent. And that means that the academic publications are to some extent publicly visible. And of course, in the early days of open access, there quickly formed the question around what is open access and how open is it? So we all know that there are degrees of openness when you actually publish your findings online. And I think this is something that we will be talking about because just putting your stuff out there is basically not enough. There need to be some standards, or should there be some standards? This is what we're going to talk about. And the first big topic that we want to address here is discoverability. Like if you publish a journal or a book chapter or entire book, open access to some extent, how can you make sure that people actually find your stuff? And the perspectives that we have here in the virtual room are very different. Russell comes from what I would like to call a rather traditional publishing house, right, that are making the move from print to digital to openness. Both Erzsébet and Agata work in contexts that's basically focus on openness and are advocating for it. And Stephanie from ScienceOpen, you work in a surrounding where it is about delivering additional services, right? The stuff that you offer is not just something turned digital, but new stuff that we need in the age of open access publications. And I would like to think that each of you have like a specific perspective on discoverability. So what does make the difference when you put something online to make it actually discoverable? Maybe Agata, from the perspective of book publishing, do you want to like just give us a little bit of idea what your perspective on discoverability is?
I think that I've been thinking about this question when I was preparing for this panel, and I think that I have actually two answers to this. I think that there are two ways that I find to be the most effective when it comes to this enhancing discoverability. Mm-hmm. And of course, my perspective comes from books, so I will not talk about journal articles because I really don't know much about that. But I think that actually the first answer probably stands both for books and journals. And I think that the key component here is a really good metadata. And what does it mean, a good metadata? Good metadata is metadata that provides at least basic information that are needed for people who are looking for your books so that they can actually find them. So of course there needs to be really basic information like your name and name of the author. It would be very nice to have information about under which license the book is released if we're talking about open access titles, and I'm only talking about open access titles. Of course, it would be really good also to have information about author in terms of having the ORCID ID. So also all sorts of standards that should be there that are still not there, and I think that that's the biggest challenge, that we don't really have these standards for metadata, especially for books. And this is probably the most crucial way of making sure that someone who's going to look for your book is actually going to find it.
Yeah.
So that would be number one. But I think that this is the most obvious answer, because we all know that, of course, you need to have rich metadata to be.
Maybe, you know what, Agata, maybe we'll leave it at that for now, because I think for us that is very, very obvious. Like, of course, you need to have good metadata, but I think that's maybe not the case for everyone. And you just named like very basic items, right? Name of the author, affiliation, ORCID, etc. And Erzsébet, I saw you nodding like vigorously. Would you agree that this is like a key thing, and are there other aspects about metadata that we should think about?
Absolutely. what we see in the context of, working with researchers and your researcher perspective is that the visibility and the discoverability issues of all kinds of scholarly outputs, not necessarily about research articles or books, is a crucial issue because in many cases, research careers depend on this visibility. The visibility and the evaluation of one's scholarly impact is very closely interlinked. And we know that that the different global scholarly information management systems that are in place for that, starting with the most obvious one, probably like a Google Scholar, but also Web of Science, PubMed, all these globally used scholarly databases are operating along good quality metadata. These aggregation platforms are usually the places where quality issues around metadata become visible, and which is what is technical issue to many of the publishers, to many of the intermediaries in the meantime, can very quickly escalate as a career issue, as a recognition issue for the researchers. Just to give you a little bit of a humanities, social science and humanities bias perspective on that, and what is at stake really, what we see is that the inclusivity of these systems and having good quality method, investing like making collective investments into good quality metadata is really key to be extended to not only to journal articles, but as Agata said, also to books. And from a perspective of the individual scholar, for instance, persistent identifiers are super important. Whether my book chapter has a DOI, if my book chapter doesn't have one, basically my individual contribution remains invisible for scholarly metrics, from citation tracking, from uncovering the way how other scholars are interacting with my production. If it's got confused together with the DOI of the whole book, which can be an edited volume or a conference proceedings or whatever, you can imagine all the confusion that it generates, that people are citing the DOI of the whole volume in their citations, and the metrics shows that, and not my individual productions. So the landscape can get quite complicated if we don't pay attention to good quality metadata. This is really the bottom line, and I think I hope I managed to highlight the point what is really at stake. It's not about ego, it's not about just the sheer sophistication towards digitally enabled workflows. It's about careers, it's about impact.
And I think what's really important is the question then, who can make that happen, right? So maybe, Stephanie, that is a good point of entry for you in the discussion. Who should be, or who can even be in charge of making sure that the metadata are correct and that stuff is discoverable? Like who should be responsible for this? Bearing in mind that the large part of our audience is researchers tonight.
In the main, for the most part, your publisher is responsible for depositing good quality metadata at places like Crossref with a DOI and tagging that metadata in a way that exposes it to computers. And that's one thing that I would also respond to Agata. It's not even just so much the case that researchers are looking for good quality metadata, but really computers are looking for good quality metadata. And you really need to make sure that your metadata is computer readable and discoverable. And so my advice would be to any researchers out there who are thinking, okay, how are we supposed to influence this?
Yeah.
Is to essentially, before you publish, check your the publisher that you're thinking about publishing, check them in some of the major databases. How discoverable are they in Google Scholar? You can check on ScienceOpen. There you will also really see, because we have a system that's, we're just exposing what is the publicly available metadata for a particular record. If you're about to publish with an open access publisher and you check and see, like, nowhere do the computers understand that this is an open access article or book, this is probably a metadata problem. It's probably the case that the publisher has not tagged the open access license in a machine readable way that aggregators like ScienceOpen, but also like Dimensions, like the Unpaywall database. If these databases don't find an open access flag, there may be a problem with the metadata, and this might be something you would want to discuss with the publisher before signing the contract, if possible. Yes. If you've already published, this is something to take up with your publisher. There are things that you can do there are things that you can do yourself in terms of creating richer metadata. For example, if you put your a copy of your book, article, dissertation onto a repository, in this case, don't be lazy. Really fill out every one of those fields. Make sure that you put as much information as possible. Just imagine the computers are using this information to help people search. So on ScienceOpen, you can click on the field affiliation and say, how much open access content is published in Berlin? This is a question you can ask on ScienceOpen, but only for those articles where the publishers deposited actually affiliation metadata with that content. So that's something that you can just be aware of. Check, check before you submit your article, talk to your publisher afterwards, and then you do have the option of putting a good tagged copy in an institutional repository.
Yeah, I think this is very important, two important aspects. Like whenever you deal with your own metadata, for example, when depositing your writings in a repository, which you should, and in most cases are legally allowed to, and sometimes even obliged to, make sure to tick all the boxes, fill in all the data. It will make you more visible. But I think also, Stephanie, your first answer is super important. Like it should be the publisher's job, right, to make sure that this is happening. And we already have two questions during the Q&A that came in that kind of feed into that, because both of them are basically about how do I find a high quality open access journal? How do I make sure that it's not a predatory journal? And this would be one of the boxes that you need to take when you check the publishing venue that is interesting to you. Do they have good metadata? Are they actually findable? And Stephanie, I would like to add to the list of aggregators that you mentioned, of course, the Directory of Open Access Books and the Directory of Open Access Journals. Those remain like the main venues to check if something meets like the basic requirements. What I'm interested now is to ask Russell, in the context of OpenD, you and your team have piled up content and advice for young researchers on publishing. If we look at the question of making sure that you have a high quality open access publisher or quality of metadata assessment, do you have any findings from that field already?
So I think that varies. Most of what we do with OpenD, we work with dissertations that have usually, in most cases, been published already through a university repository, and we try to enhance then the visibility of that dissertation or of that research that we have. And one of the things that we do pay close attention to when we then begin to take these dissertations and include them on our website is the metadata, to make sure that they can be found well, because it's critical. And I think with all of the things that have been listed so far is that we're looking at the FAIR principles, right, that were created in 2016. And so metadata is just one of these aspects that we need to think about, right? Creating a data management plan or even a metadata management plan while you're doing your research and while you're doing your writing is something that's very critical. And from repository to repository, there will be different different requirements as far as the metadata is concerned. So any box that is available, fill in information if you can. That's absolutely important. Create README files like in TXT form or PDF form that describes everything so that people can understand later on how you set your study up or how you went, like what your approach was. It needs to be analyzable by humans and machines, as we've discussed. Using software, making sure that you're providing that information. What version of software have you used? If it's an open source, then provide that code even. Make it as easy as possible for both humans and machines to access your information at a later date. And perhaps maybe I can contextualize that a little bit more, because I was looking at a study from 2019 that I found really interesting, and it had to do with perception, the human perception of content that was easy to find and that was difficult to find. And so we had the same content here, and with the people that were part of the survey, it was the case that content that was easy to find was deemed to be more useful, it was deemed to be more accurate, and it was deemed to be more relevant to the searches that they were trying to perform. And 80 to 90% of the cases, that was the outcome. And then for content that was difficult to find, those same participants found or noted that in only 30 to 40% of the cases was the information useful, relevant, and accurate. So not having information that's easy to find, whether it's by a person or by a machine, actually does have an impact then on how that information is later on used by us as human researchers. So I just wanted to mention that these may be basic questions, but creating the right parameters and making sure that they're fulfilled are super critical to even getting your information and your ideas out there then later on as part of scholarly communication or science communication, as the case may be.
Yeah, thank you for that. And also thank you, Russell, for mentioning the FAIR principles. I think we hadn't mentioned those before. I think that's also important to keep in mind. For everyone who doesn't know them, the FAIR principles were originally designed for publishing research data, but they are now becoming wider adopted in the whole open science world. And FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So these are 4 criteria along which you could check what you're doing and what you're publishing to make sure that people actually find it. And also, again, just to sum up that super important point, you don't just want people to find your stuff, you need machines to find your stuff. Like computers need to understand what you're doing. I want to circle back to Agata, because you had a second point next to metadata. Do you still know what it was? It's been a while.
Yeah, I still know what it was, but pretty much Stephanie covered it, to be honest. So Stephanie stole my argument. No, but what I wanted to say was that actually, I think, of course, because there is the question, you asked this question, Christina, who should do it? Who should be responsible for preparing this metadata? And I think, of course, that this is your publisher's responsibility, no questions asked. But I think that the very important question is also to educate researchers that this is something that they need to look into. And I sometimes almost think that every single researcher, other than, studying whatever they are studying, be it, I don't know, physics or art history, they should also have additional courses as part of the curriculum on publishing, on how to make sure that when they publish, because in the end, if you are a researcher, you will publish. And there are certain strategies to publishing that researchers should be aware of. And I think that this is something which is really missing in our system. So definitely also this responsibility in a way lies with researchers and them pushing publishers and putting pressures on publishers and saying, hey, what are you doing about your metadata? How are you making sure that my book will be visible or discoverable? I think that we talk about the distinction between the two.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up as well, because I think it sounded like I meant, check small, new, open access publishers maybe aren't doing a good job with your metadata, but it's often the case, just to be aware, it's often the case that big commercial publishers specifically don't share certain metadata with the rest of the scientific and academic community. So there are large publishers that don't share abstracts, for example, because they have abstracting products that they want to sell.
Yes.
There are publishers that don't share references because they have products that they want to sell.
Yeah.
So it can be really also a good idea to check some of the initiatives. So as a community, researchers are coming together and really trying to put pressure on the system to say at least the metadata should be free, right?
Yeah.
For everything. And there's two initiatives, one for open references, the initiative for open references I40C, and the initiative for open abstracts I40A. And both of those, if you see, strange, I don't see any abstracts on any of this content, you can also check whether a particular publisher is a signee of one of those initiatives, and you know, is working on making changes to their workflow, or if they're one of the publishers who are saying, we want to squeeze a little bit more profit out of the metadata. So I just wanted to put that out there because it's it's sometimes I think it really is the publisher's responsibility, but there's sort of different reasons why sometimes it works better and sometimes worse. Sometimes it's just technical capability. Sometimes it's really a feature and not a bug.
Yeah, I think this is also very important. And I think also that pertains to the question of how do I recognize a high quality open access publication venue, is that at this point, the big players are not necessarily the best choice. Like, because everybody is moving at different speeds, and sometimes for many different reasons, long established publishing houses are not the best ones and actually looking out for you. I just realized that a very famous open access renegade joined us, that Waltraud Paul is in the audience, who is part of like one of the most famously journals who deserted Elsevier and went open access on their own. So this is the kind of spirit that always makes me very happy. So hi, Waltraud. I wanted to get a little loop around because Agata, you said that also educating researchers is an important part. And I think, Erzsébet, this is a community where you are very active, right? In the context of training and advocacy. So what's your take? Do you think that most researchers are well aware of what's going on? How much work do we still need to do in terms of training and also establishing training as a part of like young researchers' curricula?
What I see is that in many cases, there is a huge gap between the endorsement of the generic principles of openness and transparency among researchers. And I'm not only talking, luckily, I have to tell that I'm not only talking about early career researchers, I'm talking about researchers at all career stages. I think the development of the open access agenda worldwide so far is significant, and more and more researchers understand the ethical, the economical, the quality, the scholarly transparency benefits that are coming with openness. But as I told, there is a big gap between the endorsement of these generic practices, of these generic principles, and how to translate them in one's scholarly practices. And I think, as came up already in our discussion, trust is a crucial issue here. How we develop trust towards new players of the field, born open access publishers. How do we make sure that the open access journal or the publisher we are fencing is a fair open access player? Whether there are services in place that connects the fair open access players with the research communities, those are very important questions. And for instance, the open access book toolkit that Agata linked in the chat is a very important new development pointing to this trust building, bridging direction, but of course, a significant portion of the work that we do with DARIAH also point to this direction. I spent quite a big portion of my hours helping scholars finding a publisher, but probably the most important message that I always aim to communicate towards those who have questions about academic publishing is that in terms of control, as Stephanie and Agata told, it's super important for publishers to invest into good quality metadata, to invest into digital publication workflows, to really scale up the publishing to the networked 21st century. But on the other hand, it's super important for researchers to be aware that they are quite powerful players in this whole system. They are shaping publishing. They almost always have the possibility to share their research openly, at least in some form, at least some part. And this is the kind of empowerment, this awareness raising that I find very important in my advocacy job, to make them check what are the policies of the journals, what is allowed to legally shared, how can they deposit, where can they deposit their own research. And let me also come back to the point raised by Russell in this respect, and it will take us back to the FAIR principles. I think one of the biggest difference between visibility, sheer visibility, and in-depth discoverability is to what extent we uncover the whole epistemic process of our research through our publication or through the scholarly outputs that we are sharing. Whether as researchers we invest into not only sharing the publication, which is in many cases an interpretation of the results, but the underlying structures that give us the evidence, the data, the code, the source materials. It's super important. And what we can see now is there is a big paradigm shift. Luckily from both sides, we see it happening from the publisher side as well as the side of the research culture, coming closer and closer to each other, enabling researchers to create knowledge graphs from their scholarly output. So if you think about like in a context of a dissertation or in a context of a collaborative research project, those outputs of a single project can end up very scattered, online, offline. Like part of the data you put to your institutional repository.
Erzsébet, you're covering a lot of ground right now. I'm like working hard and trying to keep all the balls in the air.
Yeah, so it's very scattered, and like you put some data in your institutional repository, you publish the article that is interpreting the results, you have some source material here and there, some of the data sitting on your hard drive. So it's if we talk about fair data, if we talk about discoverability, this is, okay, Christina, let me round it up as a kind of a
yes, please, because at this point I can't wrap up what you just said anymore. I need you to like put it in like a little nutshell for us.
I didn't want to overwhelm you. What I'm saying is that it's super important in the context of discoverability, not only to talk about the publication in the classic sense itself, yes, the research article, the book chapter, the book itself, but the underlying content that, yes, supports the research, uncovers the epistemic processes. So my advice would be to researchers, if you have the chance to link back your publication to your entry where you share your data, if you have the chance to add the details of the specifications of the software environment where you produce data and link it back to your or cite it in your research article, then you made a very significant step towards discoverability, not only visibility.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point, like opening up the whole scope of open science, looking not just at the publications, at the articles and the books, but at every other step. Like Russell also mentioned before, that includes software that you used or maybe produced, etc. Right? And the ideas of discoverability, of course, apply to every little bit of that. But I feel like the aspect of training got a little bit lost. Like there are, I already see that there are coming questions in left and right. Maybe we can talk about training venues a little bit towards the end. One aspect I would like to pick up, and that is some of you, or like two of you, and at least Erzsébet just now also mentioned the idea of trust, like how do we trust the publishing venues, etc., and also the shift that some publishing houses have done in the past years. So Russell, from your perspective, can you see like a difference in how discoverability is treated in the publishing industry or for young researchers at this point?
Well, that's a lot. With young researchers,
Okay.
more established researchers, I think it's difficult, because I think that the younger the researchers are, the more we find that they're going to be digital natives, the more that they're going to be comfortable with newer forms of publication. And one of the things that I've encountered in developing the project and working on the project for the past several years is that other projects that were funded through the research or through the Ministry of Research and Education here in Germany, they felt that they could make greater steps if more established researchers were willing to put their names on open access publications, if they were to take their research and put the weight of their name and their reputation behind a specific journal. I think that's part of what makes this so difficult right now, is that we're still within this transition period.
Yes.
Oftentimes the burden falls on the younger generation who want to establish themselves at universities to publish in this new format, but then they find themselves going up against committees and reviewers who are saying, I don't know the name of this journal, or I'm unfamiliar with that.
Yeah.
So that there's this unresolved tension still between certain generations. I don't mean to say all more established researchers are this way and all younger researchers are that way, but just painting in very broad brushstrokes. This is what I've seen so far, and this is something that I think has to be addressed a little bit more, so that we can get ourselves on our feet and move in the right direction towards that. And publishing houses, of course, also have to make changes, and it's looking inwards and finding new ways of presenting information that doesn't model the same processes that we've been using for many decades. So there are many different players, I think, who are involved in this. It's not just the publishers who have to move, they have to move, but it's also not just the researchers who have to move. It's us coming together and trying to create something new that will then benefit society. But so far, I think our discussion has really focused on only one form of science communication or scholarly communication, namely inwards. Most of the people who are going to be interested in the way that research is generated are other people who are working in similar fields. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that there are going to be people outside of the academic community who will want to read this information. And I think that that also has to be brought into consideration, which would be more of a visibility aspect, perhaps less discoverability, more visibility when we're talking about this external science communication and less this internal academic communication.
Yeah. So what do you think would be the main focus when we talk about visibility in a broader sense, when we're wanting to bridge disciplines or even communicate outside of the academic scope? Like, is it the same set of rules basically, or are there other things we need to think about when we talk about visibility?
I think there we have to, for me, when I think about visibility, it's an extension of open access and what we're doing with discoverability. But my question to myself that I've asked over the past several years, are things truly open if they're not actually understood? So it's great that we can present information to a larger audience for free, but if they don't understand the terminology that's being used, if they don't understand the methodology behind it, to me, that's not really open. So in creating more visibility for these things, we also have to think about comprehensibility. Those two aspects go hand in hand for me. But the visibility part is a bit marketing, I suppose, and looking at what your institution offers. Does your department have specific social media channels that they're using, or does your university, on a larger level, are they trying to promote the research of young scholars or established scholars? Are there platforms out there where you can perhaps network amongst yourselves, or can you present your information in new ways that would be more accessible, whether it's, I don't know, podcasts or infographics or creating video interviews, things like that, that would allow people to get a taste of what it is that you're working on without necessarily overwhelming them with the entire weight of the process behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to insert just like a little quick note for everybody who joined a second after we started the thing. So we will talk on the panel for a little longer, and then we'll open the floor for questions. And if you want to do us a favor, please post your questions either directly in the Q&A. I've already seen there's 3 there. 2 of them we kind of already answered. And if you want to join us to ask a question, please raise your hand. I see that one person that I also happen to know, hi Agnieszka, already is getting ready to ask a question. So we get to that in about 10 minutes. But if you have a question, please already post it in the Q&A or raise your hand. Oh, now she retracted it, Agnieszka. What happened? But you can use the hand raising function in the Zoom tool by clicking on your name, and then we'll get you in. But please, it's too hard to figure out the questions in the chat, so please use the Q&A or F&A if you're using the German Zoom version to ask the questions that we'll then feed in here. Russell just made the arc from discoverability to visibility. And of course, this is a question that is, I think, a little more disputed among a lot of people, whether those two actually should go hand in hand. If we talk about, does everybody need to understand my research? So without picking an order, does any of you 3, Stephanie, Erzsébet, Agata, want to jump in? Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So on ScienceOpen, it's as a sort of discovery platform, it's pretty, I think, we have some tools that are for discoverability. So we have filters. You can say, show me only open access papers on whatever topic you're searching. But we also have tools where researchers can add a graphical abstract, can add a lay summary, and can also curate content in collections of related content across all publishers, content types, so that they can really show how their research fits into a bigger question. And I think there, so there I really also do see a bit this this dichotomy, sort of on the one hand, having really the basic metadata is, you know, the nuts and bolts of the machine that let us find and search anything to let your content show up at all. But what makes somebody actually click on your record? So the fact that if you don't show up in the search, nobody's going to click on your record. If you show up in the search, what is the thing that makes somebody click on your record besides rather than somebody else's? Is it because it has a high altmetric score? Is it because it has a lot of citations? It has a catchy image or an author summary? So and we do see that people click on things with abstracts more often, whether those are author lay abstracts or publisher abstracts. And so I think there we can start picking apart what do we mean when we're talking about discoverability versus, you know, the thing that makes somebody actually then read your work, right? Have your mute off. You're muted still.
Thank you. One more for the bingo. Agata, did you want to add to that?
Yes and no, actually. I find this distinction very problematic, to be honest. But I like how Stephanie approached this, because I think that there is something to... I was trying to figure out what is the difference between discoverability, visibility, because we tend to use these terms kind of interchangeably, and whether we actually need this distinction, or is this just some completely, you know, some construct that we don't really need. But in the end, perhaps we do need this distinction. When I was thinking about what is different here, I think that when I think about discoverability, I think about something more stable and more robust. I think that there is a sense of temporality that comes with visibility.
Yes.
And there is also a sense of intentionality when it comes to discoverability. So you need to actively want to search for something. So this is when it comes to discoverability, whereas something can be visible just like that. So please excuse my art history background is kicking in here.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
But I was thinking about some kind of a visual example for that, how to distinguish these. So I was thinking, if you were walking through the streets of Berlin, since we are in Berlin Science Week, back in the days, and you would see Reichstag being wrapped by crystal, this would definitely be visible. This would be something that would attract your attention, because there is also an element of surprise to it. There are some gimmicks to it. There is this building that usually you just see as it is, and now all of a sudden it's wrapped in something. So of course this is visible, you can't miss it. And at the same time, it picks up your attention. So that's also coming back to what Stephanie was saying. What are these additional whistles that you can add to make something visible? So of course there is you need some sexiness to it. You also need this in academia. There has to be something that clicks with you. But then if you are attracted to, let's say, Reichstag being wrapped by crystal, then you will come back home and then you will try to search for it. And then, for example, if your metadata is crap, and if it's not very nicely, or if the search engine optimization is crap, then you will never know what this was actually about and why on earth this building was wrapped by an artist in such a random way. So I think that discoverability has to do with something more sustainable in a way, perhaps, but also it has to do with, it's like an additional layer. Visibility is something that sparkles, that has to resonate with you. And there is some sort of something is instant about it. But if you want to discover, you need to sit down and actually Google and look for who Christo is or why he did what he did. So that was a very long spiel on my distinction between visibility and discoverability.
But I think the idea that discoverability is for people who specifically look for a piece of information, and if your research matches that, they should be able to find it, rather than the other aspect that that you can stumble upon things, and if they're visible enough, you will see them. But of course, this raises the question, does this really have a place in academia? Like, should in academia, the stuff that has the cutest whistle should be the one that we see, right? And shouldn't like the content and the quality of the content promote itself? Like, isn't that at odds with like a basic academic ethos to think of it in terms of like almost, I mean, you use the word sexy, which is very common, right? Like have a sexy headline or an attractive abstract or something like that, or even a sexy research topic. Like even at that point, it is in some fields becoming a problem. Like, how do we separate these two? How do we promote visibility without promoting research that is done for the sake of looking good rather than actually promoting a field of work? Erzsébet, do you wanna add to that? Do you have a point of view here?
I think Agata's beautiful metaphor was a spot on, and I can further challenge this. I think visibility, at least to me, has to do with whether we find the content in question or not, whether we walk by the Reichstag. The discoverability is a little bit a deeper concept to me. Discoverability is about how we interact with the content once we found it. And it can have many flavors, as I mentioned previously. Like it has to do, if I want to project it back to the FAIR principles, visibility has to do with the very first letter of the FAIR principles, finding the content. Discoverability is a little bit deeper down in the FAIR principles. It points towards accessibility, interoperability, reusability, whether I can actually engage with what I see, whether I'm a human or a machine, whether I can make sense of it. And of course, it's a question of languages, for instance, in many cases, in the humanities. I can find an article, but if I cannot speak the language in which the article is published and there is no multilingual abstract attached to that, then no chances for discoverability. But the same for all acts of interpretation. If I'm supported enough in this discovery journey deep into the content, then it's good. Then chances are better that I will understand the content itself, and eventually I will be able to reuse. And the good news is that researchers have many possibilities at hand to help this discoverability of their scholarly outputs without necessarily going into, as you said, Christina, a very popularizing, clickbaiting mechanisms. So all sorts of scholarly transparency help your readers in discoverability. You don't need to hack the p-values. You don't need to give a clickbait title. You don't need to orient yourself towards the, so to say, sexier topics. But if you, for instance, add a foreign language abstract, or if you are publishing in your local language, an English language abstract to your article, that's already a very concrete and relatively effortless step towards discoverability. You are just guiding your reader in this respect deeper into the content. And also, if you guide them deeper inside, like you make transparent the methodology, you link out the corpus you have been working from, all these kinds of things are helping discoverability. You have to provide a tough description, linking back to Agata's beautiful race metaphor. Like, if I turn the metaphor on the head of it, and if I say I just see a picture as like a photo, a contemporary photo of the Reichstag wrapped up in this crystal color, this can be considered as data in some arts and humanities field. This is scholarly data we are working with. If there is no description on that, if it's not interlinked with the publication, if there is no provenance information about where this picture is coming from, what's my point I'm making to that, it can be visible, it can be findable, but cannot be discoverable.
I think that's a great point to the attractiveness clickbait trap that you're making here, Erzsébet. Thank you. Russell, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think that visibility has gotten a bad rap here, and I don't think that it's quite fair, to be honest. Visibility is important. There are going to be scholars that find themselves in the public eye, for instance, right now because of the pandemic. All of a sudden, virologists have had to become science communicators. And it's great that their information, that their scholarship can be discoverable, but if they find themselves in this very visible light, they have to present this information now to a wider audience, the people who are going to be in their field. And so I think that the one has to do with making this information accessible to all based on certain standards and ensuring that it's going to be findable over the long term. That is one thing. But another thing is presenting this information then to the public, sometimes because it's due to something that's happening right now. Climate questions also in recent years, I mean, the term intersectionality has become really big and big discussions about that, gender and race and things like that. So sometimes I think scholars find themselves in a very visible position, not because they've given their article, their book or something, some kind of clickbaity sexy title, but because it's very relevant to public discourse at that particular moment. And for me, it has more to do with thinking about how we want to shape the conversation then about this. How do you present yourself as a scholar? How do you present the research and your interpretation of that research to a wider audience? And I think both things are very critical and very crucial. And I know that at a recent event at the Forum Wissenschaftskommunikation here in Germany a couple of weeks back, there was a big debate about whether or not it's actually researchers' duty to be able or to have to talk with the public. And there were some that said, no, it's not. That's not where I stand. And there are people at the university who we have for that. And I was a bit shocked by that. I think as a researcher, it is also our duty to be able to present our information in terms that may be less involved to a wider audience. But that's just my opinion about the difference between visibility and discoverability. I think there's a place for both. Discoverability, I think, is essential, yes, but I don't think that visibility is just a throwaway.
Yeah, I think that was also an important wrap up, to make sure that there are different kinds of visibility, and that of course visibility is not to be equated with vanity, and that there are other aspects of this, including actually wanting to make an impact with your research. For example, when it becomes very visible due to public events. Yeah. So I want to do two things now, as we're heading in the final half-hour stretch of our event tonight. We have a third topic that we agreed beforehand that we wanted to talk about, but I would like to do is to combine that with the questions that we get, like a little bit. So maybe we can keep that in mind when we answer the questions, because our third topic was that we wanted to talk about, like, why isn't everyone doing it already? Why aren't we living in that world of perfect metadata yet, when so clearly the answers are there? So the question is, what can we do? Like, what are actionable steps? And I would just like to have that in the back of our minds when we look at the question. And one question I would like to pick up first, because we haven't touched on that at all, and that is the question, what role green open access can play. Guilherme Mohor, sorry for butchering your name, asked the question, if we consider green access really open access, and I'm pretty sure we all would say yes to that, it is open access. But I would then, Guilherme made the point of that some repositories are not found by Google Scholar. So how does green open access come into the discoverability and the visibility game? Who wants to go first? Yeah, Stephanie, thank you. So, hold on just a second. So, because this is not clear to everybody, maybe green open access means that you publish your research independently of a publisher, either before, at the same time, or after publishing it with a publisher at some kind of repository, right? Like a secondary publication in open access. Sorry, Stephanie.
I think there are a lot of repositories where you do get a lot of discoverability. So I think that it's always worth counting a green open access copy into the mix. On ScienceOpen, we added with the data set from Unpaywall, whenever we show a record, we also have the information, other versions. So you can check and see, is there a repository version somewhere? Google Scholar also does that, and some other, I think also Web of Science maybe. So there are more and more of the discovery platforms are finding that those green copies. And so even if at the beginning you think, is it worth it? I mean, you can also publish things as a preprint. Those preprints get DOIs. If you're a scientist, put it on archive for sure. If you're in the hard sciences, physics, math, computer science. So I think that there are some discipline-specific repositories where you have a very high chance of actually making a connection with potential readers. So I fully support green open access, even in cases where it's maybe not found yet. You never know. Tomorrow, Google Scholar may find that magic key and pick your publication up and add it to their database.
Yeah, thank you. I would fully agree to that. Does anybody want to add to that? Agata, yeah.
If I may, just very quickly, because I mean, first of all, I wanted to absolutely also say that I also think that green open access is the real open access. Definitely it is. In terms of how to make sure that publications that are in your institutional repositories, that they are discoverable. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Spark has worked quite extensively on this topic, and there is even there was a document produced by Spark that lists best practices for institutional repositories, and it also deals with the question of discoverability. I'm trying to find a link. If I find it on time, then I will post it in our chat.
I found a question that I like very much from somebody from Canada. And that is the question, basically, what role do libraries play in this game? Like the specific question is, would the librarian in charge of scholarly communications be the right person for dealing with the metadata? And I think the answer probably is maybe part of it, but probably there are better people to do it. But just if I look around, do you see that university libraries need to like pick up their game in this, or where do you see them in the question of discoverability and visibility? Stephanie, yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, the librarians are creating a great database for their community, for their university. And so librarians are not usually in the business of creating a great database for the entire world, but some of those really do come together with the OCLC WorldCat catalog system. So I think that there's definitely points of contact there. Until now, it really has been a little bit like the libraries do one thing and the internet does something else. Journal articles have been treated like a thing of the internet, and books have been treated like a thing of libraries. So people have to look in two different places if they want to find an open access book, or open access books are particularly, actually they want to be in the book world, but libraries often treat them as like a thing of the internet. So there's sometimes problems bringing those data sets. Really, it's about books. Library catalogs have different metadata than is used by the internet. Sometimes, sort of in basic terms, I think this is I see this as a big problem. Librarians are usually not in the business of cataloging individual book chapters or individual articles, and so that's where I see some disharmony there, and maybe something that's going to over time sort of merge together.
Yeah. Also, maybe to frame it positively, room for more collaboration to make this happen. When I think about this, I still think of the fact that there are already some university libraries, like for example in Utrecht in the Netherlands, who have completely stopped cataloging into their local catalog. They just don't do that anymore. They put everything into, I think, WorldCat directly. So that is happening. I have to admit that while listening to you and asking questions, I'm a little bit not up to, I'm not sure I read every single question. So if any of the other panelists identifies a question that they would like to answer, I would be happy for you to join in and keep looking through the questions as well. But I want to point out one answer to the library question, which is at least your communications librarian should be able to point you to a person who can help you. So I think that's always good. They're great multipliers. Yes, Stephanie, go on, please.
I was very interested in one of the questions in the Q&A that said, in the field of public health and academic research, talking to the public, what kind of tips? And I was interested to also hear from Russell, but also from anybody else. Do you have any like secret sauce? Like, I mean, let's say you didn't give your book a clickbait title, but you wish you had, because you really now would like to have more downloads of your book than you have now, or of your article. Are there like sort of the one secret tip that you would give to people? I heard before, add it as a reference to a Wikipedia article. If it's open access, you can add your book or your article to the relevant topic on Wikipedia, and this can be a huge driver of usage of your open access research. Do you guys have other great small ideas?
Russell, do you want to jump in here? I feel like this should be you.
Sure. Yes. I mean, this is really, so I've never obviously had to coach someone through talking to the public about a pandemic before, so that would also be something new for me. But so I think in any situation, when you're going to explain something that's highly complex, assume that the people that you're going to talk to know that it's a complex matter, and do your best simply to put it in a way that you could explain it in a couple of sentences. I mean, the more you can boil it down into something that they can take with them, the better that it's going to stick. But it's also okay if you have to explain something. If there's a term that you can't get around, like we shouldn't say that jargon is absolutely to be avoided at all costs. I mean, that's ridiculous. We can't water down scholarship that much. So it's finding the right mix between saying, okay, I'm going to have to use certain terms that you've probably never heard of before, but that's okay, and this is what that means. And as soon as you give them the definition, then everything clicks into place. But not losing yourself in the explanation, I think that's the biggest thing. Just get to your point. Leave out everything else that's irrelevant to that.
Yeah, I think the just get to your point part is it sounds a little obvious, but I think that is very, very important, that as researchers, scholars, scientists, we are used to making sure to, hedge all everything, like make sure it's super watertight, explain all the little details. But when you communicate with the broader audience, it's okay to know that you've done that research and just get to the point, to the main point, without watering down the content. I think that's a great, that's important. Yeah.
Sorry, just to follow up really quickly. It means one of the things that we do with the platform and the research that we publish there, that we also offer making an infographic out of a dissertation. So we're trying to take 300 or 400 pages and put it onto one single DIN A4, so like a normal sized letter page. And you have to leave out so much information when you're doing that, and it's really painful for a researcher to have to leave out all of this information. But it helps you focus and hone your message. What is the question that I asked? What are the main answers that I found? And how can I present that in 6 sentences and a couple of diagrams?
Yeah, and I think this also includes the underlying idea of using different formats and different channels, right? So I mean, some communities are super active on Twitter, and it actually makes a difference if you're there or not. I mean, the open access and open science community sure is, but also scientific and research communities are active there, and this will also differ, right? This will differ from field to field where you will find them, and if you want to reach out to reach a broader audience, it might be reaching out to journalists or following those communities on Twitter and or somewhere else, like Twitter being like a stand-in for any kind of social media or other platforms.
I think that scholarly blogging is also a helpful tool in this respect. I saw many success stories in which the blogging is functioning really a bridge or a translator between, the academic discourse and the public discourses. And there were many success stories. For instance, a historian found the local community whose history he had been partially researching, and like the two kind of communities found each other, and eventually the local inhabitants could even enrich the research via citizen science. So blogging can really be a game changer in this respect, also because many cases scholars who are regularly blogging about the research, they report that it even helps their academic thinking to be more, as Russell said, to the point. Once you just sit down, you can open up your brain a little bit, either to the public or to your peers. You can validate or crowdsource early ideas, but you can also just say it out loud, and you can bring back that effortless clarity to your academic writing.
Yeah, I think that is super important. Blogging as an important point to, and I think this is really, really important what you just said, Erzsébet, not just to make it more accessible to others, but to just reconsider what you're doing and get a new perspective on your own work. Stephanie, yes.
What about video? Has anybody had, I've heard some good success stories with YouTube videos of methods and things like that. Is that something that in the sort of book and dissertation publishing that you're seeing more of?
I can't really speak to actual cases, but we did have more and more authors actually asking for some kind of video abstracts to be included, and I'm talking not only about I'm actually talking about my previous publisher that I worked for. So yes, we've seen it quite a lot, but I've never seen any sort of data that would confirm that in a way that helps your research somehow. So I'm not entirely sure. I think that this is still kind of new and emerging. So perhaps we need to just wait a little bit more so that we then have enough data to analyze whether this is actually something that could help you or quite the opposite.
I still have one lingering question in the Q&As that again is about quality of a publishing venue. And it's again asking about how to distinguish serious journals from predatory journals. I would very much like to not go into very deep into that, but offer just a brief answer, and then maybe one of you folks want to add to that. That basically there are some obviously predatory journals, and you will know them when you see them. Like it will be very, very clear. Then there's a gray zone. Then there are journals who are simply not well known yet. And then there are the old ships that have been around forever. And I think the best way is to actually engage with your own community about those journals. Like don't refer to lists on the web. Use basic stuff like the Directory of Open Access Journals to get like a ground rule. Don't look at blacklists, they don't work, they're a problem. And look in your specific field, in your specific community, who knows this journal? Do you know someone on the board? Has somebody published there, and ask around. I think this is the best way to actually do this, to trust the community. Yeah, and somebody just posted the nice resource, Think, Check, Submit, which is a great checklist to look at to figure out if you are looking at a journal that is not actually interested in promoting research, but it's just there for the profit. But please keep in mind that most publishing houses are profitable enterprises, and this is how it's all structured. So just because something costs money doesn't mean it's bad, even though in the field of open access for the reader, everything should be free. Okay, we're running towards the end of our time. I'm not sure. I think we went quite deeply into the question of visibility and what to do. Here's a thought in the question that Niklas Hartmann just posted. It's more a comment than a question, and it says the worst predatory publishers are Elsevier and Co. So this is this is probably pertaining to the fact that some of the big 5 publishing houses are so profit oriented that some people cannot fully trust them to believe that they actually have the promotion of science at heart, or like at the core of their business model even. Does anybody want to comment on that? It's a touchy subject in a way now. No. Okay, so we just leave it standing there as a comment. And I will now you're moving the chat to the Q&A section. That is not exactly what we had in mind. But does any of you have found any more questions that we should oh yeah, maybe a final one. That's maybe interesting. and that is the question if we want to comment on Plan S, so on the big European initiative to promote open access, how that relates to our topics of discoverability and visibility. I have to admit that I am not up to date on everything on how Plan S is going. Does everybody have the current day insight, how this is shaping up, and if it does anything for our topic today?
I think one of the probably for the individual researchers most important element of Plan S that is, in my view, a very, very, very welcome move in the development of open access in Europe is that there is a huge emphasis on enabling researchers to keep their copyrights of their intellectual property. This is a super important step towards taking back control over scholarly communication, because as long as researchers, it's all about power relations. I think if Plan S could result in just a little bit of a rebalancing the power relations between funders, researchers, and big publishing houses, that would be a super important thing to happen. And as a practical entailments of it is the rights retainment, as I mentioned. So as long as researchers publishing with big high prestige publishers are forced to give away their intellectual property rights over their research, even if it's published open access, even if it's under some sort of Creative Commons license, they are not, their chances are more limited to disseminate it the way you want, to make it discoverable for people, to machines the way you want. And I see a lot of work going on these days in the context of Plan S, not only on the level of policies and the level of funded policies, but on more practical advocacy levels. Spark Europe and many other advocacy bodies are pushing this forward to help researchers in very practical ways to keep their intellectual property rights in whatever publishing agreement settings. This is super important.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Now we have a little discussion going on in the Q&A. Also, I saw Waltraud, I saw you raised hand, but we're like 1 minute from wrapping it up. So please, I apologize for not getting you on in the audio just a minute before we close. I think this is going to be a little too hard to juggle for me. But please feel free to go into the chat, and maybe we can leave that open for a little bit even after we're done. I have one final very easy question, and that is, do we see open access book coming out of preprint servers? Because I don't think we do we?
I think I'm sorry, I will be quick and then I will allow others to talk. I think we see a big conflict here, especially if you're talking about first monographs, open access or not. In many cases, there is the first monograph that researchers are publishing is their dissertation. And it's super challenging these days to publish PhD dissertations open access, because what we see is that in many cases, there is a huge conflict of interest here. Publishers are seeking to publish brand new unpublished research, and sometimes having it out in an institutional repository as a PhD thesis can be seen as an obstacle.
Yeah, so the easy answer would be no, we actually don't see that very much. Although this is also discipline specific, right? There are some where this is handled differently, where the book aspect of the dissertation is not as important. And I say that with all love for books in general. It's 5:30. We've reached the end of our our allotted time here at the first week of Berlin Open Access Week. Let's do a little lightning round, like at the end, from everyone. Like, is there like one nice actionable step or good advice, one sentence or less, that you would give to our audience in terms of discoverability and visibility? Stephanie, do you want to start a quick fire round of what you want to advise or give them on their way?
Sure. Look for your work on ScienceOpen. Check us out. We are here in Berlin. If you have any questions, if you can't find your paper, contact us. Let us know. And, you know, we're a super cool young team in Berlin. Some people here also used to belong as well to the ScienceOpen team, Agata and Erzsébet, and
Okay.
yeah, would be super happy to hang out and chat.
That's pretty straightforward. So get in touch with ScienceOpen. Russell, what are your parting words?
I guess I'll speak to visibility then. I would say define your audience. Who do you want to talk to? Are you talking to people inside the academic community and other researchers, or are you talking to people outside? And then based on that definition, tailor your messages appropriately.
That's great advice, really. Erzsébet, what do you say?
Try to let go all your fears and all your peer pressures that keeps you away from exploring the many tastes and many flavors of openness and open scholarly sharing.
Thank you. Agata, what's your last thought for today?
Well, I think that first of all, pressure your publisher so that they do a good job and actually ensure that your work is discoverable, but also in the spirit of sort of pitching our own projects that we work on. I would like to maybe also point you to some work that the Copying project is doing, because there is a brand new report that is about challenges of discoverability for open access books that was just published. I put the link there. And one of the further steps that we want to work on now is actually some kind of standards for metadata for open access books. So Copying is looking into creating these standards, a very basic one, and then a sort of enriched version. So I think that if you're interested in that, we will keep you updated with more coming out of the Copying project, I think.
Awesome. Good. Then my final word is, in German, it's called bildet Banden. So find your community. Like, don't do this on your own. Look for people who have the same issues. Come to events like tonight. Look at who's there. Stay in touch. Reach out. Like, we can do this as a community, both from the publisher, researcher, and infrastructure perspective. I think this is the way forward. Like, you don't have to do this on your own. All right, I think that's it for today. So I hope everyone enjoys the rest of Berlin Science Weeks. Thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, see you soon, I hope.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
a lot.
Thanks for participating. Take care.
Bye.